Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. And before we get into the content of today's topic, if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and while you're at it, throw a like on this particular video if you want to support me in getting the word out there about the evidence-based approach of integrating the skills of dialectical behaviour therapy and the theories of personality that we get from schema therapy to once and for all effectively change those maladaptive behaviours that most of us seem to use when we're dealing with our underlying emotional issues. Oh yeah! In this particular video, I want to talk about something that everybody has, but not a lot of people want to admit to having. This is something that we all do, but when questioned on it, we often push back with a denial like we've been accused of a crime of some sort. Acknowledging that it's pretty common for us to look at life from this particular point of view and recognizing how it tends to come from absolute all or nothing perspectives is something that I believe we have to develop the capacity to do if we want to understand our behavioural responses. So today, let's have a conversation about the way we take a look at and begin to accept the existence of our own expectations. When I originally stepped into my own recovery journey, and I'm talking about the time I did this seriously, not the half-hearted attempts that I'd tried a number of different times before, one of the things that I was consistently left the impression about when it came to living the life of an addict was that we all have to learn about being accountable, and we all have to look at and basically change our own internal expectations. And this wasn't necessarily based on only changing the expectations we put on ourselves. It was also connected to the expectations we inexplicably hold for others. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that in some of the circles I was involved in, I was led to believe that addicts were the only ones who had this type of expectation, and it was only the addict who had to learn about accountability, which, I've got to be honest, often left a really bitter aftertaste in my mouth whenever I was exposed to this particularly judgmental point of view. Expectations are bad and we have to get rid of them was a self-defeating narrative I was creating in my own internal world time and time again. And as I've gone about my own serious recovery journey, which at the time of this recording has been happening for about 14 years now, I've slowly but surely built the capability to practice self-reflection and, by extension, created a decent level of self-awareness, even if I say so myself. Practicing the mindfulness aspect of dialectical behaviour therapy has been instrumental in this success, which has also played a significant role in adding a level of accountability to my thinking that means I can step out of consistently blaming others and into living the life I want to live by being the person I want to be according to my true, authentic values and beliefs. And while I think it's important to acknowledge that, in my opinion, this is absolutely essential for those of us who are looking to change those addictive, obsessive and compulsive coping mechanisms that we use as the solution to all of our problems, it's also important to recognise that people who struggle with this particular type of behaviour are not the only ones who lack accountability, and they are definitely not the only ones who have expectations. Setting standards and holding expectations around them is a natural part of being human. It's actually how we grow and learn. If I don't have expectations for myself and those I have around me, then I'd never push myself to do anything more. I'd never grow or learn anything new, and I'd probably surround myself with people that, quite frankly, are usually the type of people that I would categorise as simply not my tribe. Does that sound like a familiar lifestyle? For me, having expectations is exactly the same as people having judgments. We all have them. In fact, anyone who says they don't have judgments or expectations is either lying or completely unaware of their own internal narrative. And I tend to call bullshit whenever I hear this type of proclamation. Bullshit. We all have judgments and we all have expectations. With judgments, it's about what we do with them when we notice their existence that defines who we are and whether we're living the life we want to live by being the person we want to be. With expectations, it's not about the expectation itself. It's about what it means if the expectation isn't met. Most people who struggle with the type of behaviours that we're trying to change in this work tend to have an outlook that is pretty black and white. It's absolute, and it often leaves us sitting in spaces of right versus wrong or good versus bad that have us flipping from one extreme to the other, battling with feelings of guilt and toxic shame. And this plays out somewhat perfectly when we hold a level of expectation that falls into this type of thinking. Our expectations basically have an unrelenting standard that, if met, has us filled with joy and happiness that meets our unmet emotional needs. At the same time, if the expectation isn't met, it clearly must mean the opposite, and that's just not a good place for us to be. For example, let's pretend that I'm at school. I know I seem a little bit old, but let's just pretend for a moment or two. And while I'm at school, I've got the expectation that I'm going to get a high grade in my upcoming exams. For argument's sake, let's say my expectation is that I'm going to get 90%. I take the exam and I feel like I did pretty well, but when my results come in, I find out that I got 82%. While for many people this is still a fantastic mark, one that has us achieving a really great level of academic success, for me, because of the meaning that I attach to not hitting my expectation, then clearly I am a total failure and I need to drop out of school altogether. When it comes to expectations that we put on others, perhaps I'm in a friendship with you and my expectation is that you will always be there when I need you to help me. Then one day I call you with a request to help me move this coming weekend, and you tell me that unfortunately you're not available because you've got something else on. From my unrealistic perspective, one that's tied to those unrelenting standards, clearly this means you're not my friend in the way that I thought you were. So fuck you, buddy. This relationship is over and we are completely done. Now, while this might seem a little extreme, and to some degree I'm exaggerating a point to prove a point, you might find some examples that are pretty similar to these in different areas of your life. Maybe you're setting expectations around your own behaviour changes, what your behaviour should look like now that you're taking these things on. Maybe there's an expectation around how long it should take for you to make these changes, and the fact it's taking longer than you expected clearly means that it's not working. So fuck it, I'm going back into the old way of doing things because that was just easier. Obviously, there's a number of different ways that expectations can impact us, and the big thing we're trying to draw attention to is whether or not there's an unrelenting standard, and if there is, what does it mean that the expectation isn't being met? When we're setting our expectations, it's also really important to establish whether the standards you're asking either yourself, other people, and sometimes even life itself are actually achievable things to do. In other words, are you setting realistic expectations, or are these unrealistic desires that are based in a fantasy that's simply just not doable? Now, there are a lot of different ways to look at exploring if our expectations are realistic or not, but for me, it's really quite simple. Is the expectation or the standard that we're setting something that the person is able, capable and willing to do? Able, do they have the time? Capable, do they have the skills? And willing, is it something that they actually want to do? In new relationships, this can be a little bit tricky. So it's primarily based on our ability to first communicate what it is that we want, and then some real-time observations of how people carry out the request. With previously established relationships, all we have to do is look at the history. If I keep asking people, which includes myself, to do things that they've never demonstrated the ability, capability, or willingness to do, then why do I keep setting this unrealistic expectation? So in review, there's absolutely nothing wrong with expectations. We actually need them so that we can learn and grow. It's understanding what it means if the expectation isn't met that causes the emotional impact. And this is where we want to be accountable for our feelings and the stories that are responsible for their activation. Guys, I hope this video gave you some insight for the way we discuss expectations in the work that we do at the Liberation Place. If this has happened to pique your interest and you want to know more, please come join the live online meetings that I facilitate each week for free on Zoom. I'll leave some links to the page containing more information about these groups in the description below. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you again soon. Please like and subscribe. Take care, be safe and be well.